I don't think it's a mystery that the English language has gone through some changes over the entirety of its existence. Generally, Americans have taken the blame from our buddies across the pond for butchering the language. But is it really all our fault? Or is it our fault at all? Stay tuned. In 1995, at the opening of a British Council campaign to preserve the worldwide dominance of the English language, King Charles, then Prince Charles, opined that Americans invent all sorts of nouns and verbs to make up new words. It was his opinion that the English language needed to be protected from us uncouth Yanks who were corrupting the language, and that we must act now to ensure that English, and to my mind that means English, maintains its position as the world language well into the next century. Say what? But did you know that there are elements in the English language that the king may believe Americans changed that we never changed in the first place? Words that were actually changed by the Brits? When the British crossed the pond to colonize North America, they brought the English language with them, and everyone sounded alike. So that means that the English colonists had that beautiful English accent, right? Well, no. The accent that most of us view as the English accent didn't exist until after the American Revolutionary War, when those 13 American colonies became the 13 states. Let's dive in and take a look at a few of the differences in pronunciation, as well as spelling differences where we separate American English from British English. To do this, I'll need to imitate the British accent, so cut me some slack. After all, I am a Texan. One obvious difference is the rhotic or hard R in American English, where the R at the end of a word is pronounced, and in British English it's dropped. So in British English, the word other is pronounced other. The R doesn't have to be at the end of the word, though. For example, park and large become park and large. Hey, don't blame Americans for hardening up those R's. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it was the Brits who allowed those R's to disappear into the ether. Not that there weren't Americans that dropped the R's too. There were. New Englanders that did more business with the UK drop-kicked that R to the curb too. Some New Englanders parked their car in Harvard Yard, although I really don't believe that you can park your car there, but why ruin a good example? Let's take a look at the A sound in words like past and last. This is another example of a sound that was the same on both sides of the pond, and it wasn't past and lost. The A sound in those words started out the same as most Americans pronounce it now. After the Revolutionary War, Americans kept the past and last sound, while the Brits changed to the ah sound. To be fair, the R and A pronunciations have gone back and forth in the UK over time. Until the 1500s, it was ah and the non-rhotic R. Then in the 1600s, those two sounds were pronounced the way Americans do now. This pronunciation was brought to America when the English started colonization in the 1600s. After the English were shown the door at the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, Americans for the most part stuck with over and past, while the English began to drop the R and use the ah pronunciation. Next, let's take a look at the word herb. I pronounce it herb, not pronouncing the H, but have heard other Americans say herb, pronouncing the H. Before the 19th century, both Americans and the English pronounce it herb. Why? Because this word is borrowed from an old French word, like many words are in the English language, herbe, with the H added from the Latin word herba, which means grass, with the H being silent. Today, Americans, or most of us anyway, pronounce herb with no H, while the Brits pronounce it with the H. Let's get to the dropping syllables issue. The Brits drop syllables in words like secretary, pronounced secretary, while Americans pronounce all syllables. To give equal time and be fair, in some regions of the U.S., Americans tend to forget the number of letters we have in the alphabet. For example, in the Pittsburgh area, the L seems to have been dropped in the Monongahela River, making school turn into school and pulling turns into pooing. It's not just missing letters and syllables, but entire words that have been lost in the pond, with apologies to one of my favorite YouTubers. Here are a few examples. Americans use the words fall and autumn. However, the English once used both, but drop-kicked fall to the curb over time. The word fall is an old Anglo-Saxon word, and autumn is from a French word derived from the Latin word autumnus. The word apartment, meaning a suite of rooms, came to the New World from England. In the 1800s, the English started using flat, and apartment disappeared like a puff of smoke. The word mad was used by both Americans and the British to mean angry or crazy. Americans have still kept both meanings, while the British stopped using mad to mean angry by the 19th century. Both Americans and the English walked on both the sidewalk and pavement in the past. Now Americans walk on a sidewalk, and the English walk on the pavement. Both cooked on a stove or a range. In the 19th century, the British started to cook on a cooker. American children enjoy riding on a merry-go-round, but British kids get their thrills by riding on a roundabout. Roundabout is the newer word. Of course, we can't leave this discussion without taking a look at color versus color with the U, favor versus favor with the U, and labor versus labor with the U. Well, you get my drift. I've actually heard Americans say that adding the U is wrong. That's like saying that driving on the left-hand side of the road is wrong. If that's what your peeps do and it's considered normal, and legal, who's to say that this is wrong? But back to the subject. Where did those different spellings come from anyway? These spellings have changed over time. The OR is the Latin ending, while OUR is from Norman French. Both of these endings were used on both sides of the pond in the 1700s and 1800s. Shakespeare himself used both endings interchangeably, and are you going to argue with Shakespeare? Are you? This OR versus OUR mess was eventually cleaned up, with Samuel Johnson picking the OUR endings for his 1755 English dictionary, and Noah Webster siding with OR for his 1828 American dictionary. So have Americans changed the English language? Well, it seems that a lot of these changes were instigated by the English, not Americans, King Charles. And languages, like a lot of things, continue to evolve, as noted in this quote. It is quite impossible to stop the progress of language. It is like the course of the Mississippi, the motion of which at times is scarcely perceptible. Yet even it possesses a momentum quite irresistible. Words and expressions will be forced into use, in spite of all the exertions of all the writers in the world. Well, Dr. Johnson, you sure are right about language changing over time, because I sure don't speak like that. A lot of changes in the English language, as well as other languages, have been influenced by American TV. Who knew that a funny word like Google would turn into a verb? And I'll never forget the interview where Patriots offensive tackle Sebastian Vollmer, originally from Germany, was trying to teach Tom Brady a little German. Then Brady asked, "What is touchdown in German?" "Touchdown," Vollmer deadpanned. I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to leave some comments. I'll post the resources I used for this video in the description. I'm just glad to find out that Americans aren't responsible for the destruction of the English language. The bottom line is that languages are always changing, adding flavor to the world in which we live. If you don't want to be responsible for the destruction of this channel, remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for more videos like this one, or maybe for something completely different. You never know what you'll get and truthfully, I don't either.